Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into an absolutely fascinating journey. We're actually going to step into the shoes of a linguistic detective to uncover the thrilling, really meticulous work required to translate ancient, cryptic messages into the clear sentences we read every single day. If you love a good puzzle and you want to understand just how deep language truly goes, well, you're in the exact right place. So let's start with a highly relatable scenario. Have you ever been reading a text, maybe a historical document, a philosophical treatise, or a passage from the Bible, and found yourself nodding along to a beautifully profound sentence, only to stop a second later and realize you have absolutely no idea what it actually means in practical terms? It's a universal struggle, right? We assume we understand it just because the words are familiar, but the underlying relationships between those words are actually completely hidden from us. Okay, let's dive into this with a prime example right off the bat. Take this incredibly famous opening verse from Ephesians 1:1, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God. Now ask almost anyone if they know what that means, and they'll confidently say yes, but ask them to actually explain the exact relationships between these entities, like how exactly is Paul an apostle of Jesus by the will of God, and suddenly you get a whole lot of ums and ahs. The words are simple enough, but extracting the concrete meaning, it's surprisingly difficult. Enter our lead investigator for this explainer, Dr. George Payton. Dr. Payton is a brilliant expert in Bible translation, and his work centers exactly on solving this problem. He teaches these incredible masterclasses on how to break down these linguistic stumbling blocks. His entire goal is to alleviate the burden on the modern reader, stripping away the difficulties that make ancient texts sound so foreign and hard to parse. That brings us to Section 1, the culprits. What exactly makes ancient texts so cryptic? First up, we've got a grammatical suspect known as the verbal noun. This is when an action word essentially puts on a disguise and masquerades as a thing or an idea. Think of words like salvation, forgiveness, or adoption. Because they're nouns, they act like static objects on the page. But fundamentally, they're actions. Someone is saving, someone is forgiving, someone is adopting. Verbal nouns are inherently cryptic because they hide the vital information. They just don't explicitly tell us who is doing the action and who is receiving it. And then we have our second culprit, the genitive phrase. Generally, these are phrases using the word of to show possession or relationship. Like the Book of Ted. Simple enough, right? But the problem arises when ancient writers link these genitive phrases with verbal or abstract nouns. Think of a phrase like knowledge of salvation. Suddenly, the confusion is compounded massively. Does it mean knowledge that saves? Knowledge about being saved? Who exactly has the knowledge? It's like a giant puzzle. And this brilliantly illustrates just how incredibly dense ancient texts, particularly Paul's epistles, really are. In just a tiny 4-verse span of Ephesians chapter 1, translators identify between 15 and 20 distinct translation challenges. Just take the phrase intention of his will. That's actually 3 challenges rolled up into one single phrase. Every time you combine genitive phrases with abstract nouns, you create this massive bottleneck of information that makes the text notoriously difficult to unpack. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This just sounds like a very dry, academic grammar exercise. But we need to ground this in reality, because the human stakes here are incredibly high. Dr. Payton shared a really profound anecdote from his time working on translating the Bible into the Orma language. He was sitting at his home, working day after day alongside local men, just grinding through the text. One day, his 10-year-old son walked up to him and said, "Dad, you're the only one translating this. If you get it right, it's going to be there for a long time. If you get it wrong, it's going to be there for a long time." Wow. When his son asked if he ever thought about that, Dr. Payton replied that he wrestles with it every single minute of every day. This meticulous detective work matters deeply because whole communities are going to rely on these words for generations. Translators walk daily in a sense of humility, bearing the immense weight of getting it right. So how do they do it? Let's get into Section 2, the linguistic breakdown. How to solve the puzzle. Dr. Payton uses a very deliberate step-by-step breakdown method, honestly exactly like an investigator unpacking physical clues at a crime scene. Step 1, they identify those sneaky verbal nouns and figure out the hidden participants. Who is actually doing what to whom? Step 2, they map out the relationships between the different clauses to see how the logic flows. And finally, Step 3, they rewrite the verse into a clearer first draft that explicitly states what was completely hidden before. Let's actually see this in action. Here is a perfect mini mystery from Acts 13:12. In the story, A proconsul sees Paul and Barnabas perform a miracle and is amazed at the teaching of the Lord. But pause for a second and ask yourself, what exactly was he amazed by? Now, what's really interesting about this is how the breakdown method immediately clarifies the whole picture. Teaching is a verbal noun. Okay, so who is doing the teaching? Paul and Barnabas. Who is being taught? The proconsul. And the phrase of the Lord, does that mean the Lord is the one doing the teaching? No. Breaking down the participants reveals that Paul and Barnabas are teaching the proconsul things about Jesus or from the scriptures about the Lord. Once you unpack those invisible participants, the fog completely lifts. Let's scale this up. Section 3, Translating the Sower, a case study in Mark 4. Let's apply this to a real-world scenario from a Tanzanian workshop, where translators from 10 different language groups were all working together on a very famous passage. It's the parable of the sower from Mark chapter 4. Specifically, Jesus' explanation of the seed that falls among the thorns. The text says that the worries of the world, deceitfulness of riches, and desires for other things enter in and choke the word. Talk about an incredibly dense string of abstract concepts. Let's put our detective hats on for a moment and look at the first phrase, the worries of the world. Let's actively inquire here. Is the world itself feeling anxious? Is the planet worrying? Obviously not. We have to unpack those hidden participants. Worry is the verb. The people who heard the word are the ones actually doing the worrying. And what are they worrying about? They're worrying about the things of the world, or worldly possessions. Next, we zero in on the deceitfulness of riches. Now, Dr. Payton notes that the Tanzanian translators, who were using Swahili as their language of communication, ran into a massive cultural and linguistic roadblock right here. When Dr. Payton asked the translators what the literal Swahili translation of this phrase actually meant, they had a completely unexpected answer. In Swahili, the literal translation sounded like swindling people out of riches. So the translators logically concluded that the text was just giving a moral rule. Hey, it's bad to cheat or swindle people out of their money. What an incredible, surprising aha moment for the team. Because the phrase was so incredibly dense, the literal translation completely missed the literary personification. The text doesn't mean people are tricking others out of money. It means the riches themselves are doing the deceiving, tricking the people who want them. So the crucial point is how transformative a proper draft can be. Dr. Payton's proposed English rendering clarifies this beautifully. He suggests, but when they worry about worldly things and are deceived by wanting riches and desire other things, these things choke out the word, and they do not produce fruit in them. By breaking down the abstract nouns, assigning the correct participants, and clarifying the logic, the true intended meaning is finally brought into sharp, clear focus for the modern reader. And this takes us to our final part. Section 4, the scale of the task, putting the puzzle pieces together. Now that we've seen how intricate and demanding it is to decode just one or two phrases, let's zoom out for a second. Dr. Payton tells a wonderfully humbling story about working from home on the introduction to the book of Romans. Now, Romans 1, verses 1 through 7 is one massive, continuous, interlocking sentence filled to the brim with complex theological concepts. After spending the entire morning meticulously mapping out which clause subordinates which and how all the participants interlink, he sat down for lunch. His kids looked at him and asked, "Dad, what does that mean?" And after a whole morning of expert analysis, his honest answer was simply, "I have no idea. I don't know yet." He was literally still figuring out the interrelationships. Let's move on and see how this builds, because this is where the sheer magnitude of the task truly hits home. After spending days unpacking just the first 7 verses of Romans, there are 7,793 verses left to translate in the New Testament alone. Every single one requires that exact same painstaking, puzzle-solving dedication. So I leave you with this final thought. The next time you effortlessly read a beautifully clear, fluently translated sentence in an ancient text, will you recognize the thousands of invisible puzzle pieces that a linguistic detective meticulously arranged just so you could understand it? Thanks for joining us on The Explainer. Keep learning and stay curious.